Well, today I'm sitting here with Michael Carlson, the president of Digital Grid North America for Siemens. Michael, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for the invitation.
We're here at South by Southwest Eco, and you've just been on a panel, but I'm really interested in industry transformation and the role of technology in what's happening in energy. But Siemens, you know, the sun never sets on Siemens. You're all over the world, and so I guess my first question would be, you know, you recently announced Digital Grid. Tell me why Siemens is going down the digitalization road.
So if you look at, and as you point out, it's a global corporate initiative and strategy for us around digitalization. Yeah. And if you look specifically to the electrification of the industry, we have had a history, you know, dating back 100 years to creating the devices that have enabled electrification. And 20 years ago, we started to put automation into those devices. But really, it's the next level of opportunity, capability, and efficiency that you start to drive into those devices with digitalization. And digitalization is a three-step process. It's the acquisition of data from these devices. It's the analysis and integration of that data into how the machines are run.
Yes.
And then it's the return of the results of that analysis back to the machine for its response to whether it's the consumer on the demand side or the generator on the production side. That's where we're going to get the next level of efficiency out of the machine. It's not about creating the next best transformer, the next best generator. It's how to leverage this huge investment to the next level of efficiency and opportunity.
It's such a good point. And so here we are, we're looking at a grid that is more complex than ever. I guess my question to you would be, how does a connected grid equate to an energy efficient grid?
So if energy efficiency is, you know, there are multiple stakeholders, multiple participants, so it's going to mean a little bit different to every one of those in the system.
Yes.
But if you look at the connected grid and the responsiveness, you again go back to the history of the grid. It was built to run on averages.
Yes.
You never want the grid to sag, so you always need to overproduce what is the demand, aggregate demand on the grid. The efficiency for grid efficiency, whether, let's just start on the production side. Why should I produce a 15 to 30% cover on the demand if through digitalization, knowing what the grid and all the devices are doing on that grid in real time would allow me to run it at 10% and still receive the same performance, the same reliability, the same sustainability. Think about taking 10 to 15% of the generation capacity offline. It would be huge.
It would be.
Huge for efficiency on an economic level, huge from an environmental level, huge from an investment level. So that's just one example of where connecting these machines into a more real-time model. Don't forget, energy is that commodity that is produced and consumed simultaneously. We need to get the machines talking to each other to make that into the most efficient model capable.
And we need the machines talking to each other. So when we had an opportunity to attend the Siemens Industry Analyst Conference in Boston with you, and riveting discussion, but the deep dive that Siemens has done into connected devices, autonomous systems, and seeing an Internet of Things platform for the future, I'm fascinated at how are connected, remote, and autonomous devices going to be changing the way the energy sector works, a utility works, and how a customer interacts with that.
I think that's the biggest point. How does the customer interact with that interconnected grid? Because ultimately, the grid was built to serve the consumer.
Amen.
We need to make sure the consumer is part of, and not to relegate the consumer to a machine, but the consumer is causing the machines to do what is needed to serve their demand.
And the human is the most important part of the grid, aren't they? In a lot of ways, not only the system planner, but the person on the end of it.
Grid was built for the consumer, the human. The grid needs to be responsive to it.
Yeah.
But again, not in a disconnected model-based approach, but in a real-time responsive approach.
Yeah.
You know, and analogies are just huge, but you look at what's going on in the airline industry and how they've moved real-time seat distribution
Absolutely.
up to the market. And the profitability that you're now starting to see out of an industry that historically was non-profitable, or they'd go through the peaks and valleys. It's been through the real-time management of their systems.
You're hitting on modern governance and accounting really being a driver of why these efficiencies are taking place. Stepping back, you bring up a really good point, and Capgemini and MIT did a study of how technology is adopted, new technology especially, in different industries. And they found, not surprisingly, that the electric and energy industry lags behind consumer electronics, lags behind healthcare, lags. These are fields, industrial manufacturing. These are fields that Siemens has been in since the beginning of Siemens.
Yep.
And so how are you helping the energy industry, but then how are you using technology as a tool and a resource to help the energy industry?
And I think that lag that you describe, it is apparent. And I would argue that it's there for one core reason. Adoption of technology and change is always due to a force. And this industry has been, at the macro level, lacking a force. As long as I flip the switch and the power's there, as long as the consumption process meets my everyday lifestyle, and as long as the bill is economically survivable.
Yeah.
Why do I want change?
Yeah.
Either why do I want change forced on me, or why do I want change that I gravitate towards? There's no value benefit. And I would say if there's one criticism of our industry overall, is we need to present that value of change to the participants.
So with that, change is an inherent part of growth. How do you see Siemens providing that assistance to the energy industry to grow in the next 5 to 10 years? You know, we're going to see this huge shift to an Internet of Things platform. It's a when, not if, right?
Right.
You guys have been going down that wormhole for some time. You guys are probably beating the rest of the industry in a lot of respects to that, but how are you assisting that industry down that path?
Right. I think it's multiple, and you've got to have technology. It's an industry that requires reliability. There's a safety factor. There's a legacy of the confidence that we put in the grid. It's something that sits behind us, but you could argue the entire system operates because of it, economically, socially, security-wise. So what we're first doing, above and beyond, we've got to get the presentment of information in a usable form.
Yes.
First and foremost, there is data. There's arguably been data on the grid forever.
Yep.
The question is, how do you start making valued use of that data as information? So if you look at the user factors, the whole concept of how to integrate human factors and human behaviors into it is an investment that we're making at Siemens. The second is on the analytics of data. So if I can present it to you, how do I put intelligence into it so you can quickly disseminate what that is? And the dissemination is both through machine logic, but also through, again, the human factors. Because we don't view the grid as totally, on autopilot.
Right.
There's got to be that human interaction, both from a change parameter, but then from a safety and backup model as well.
So it's funny, so I guess really digitalization has been a way of Siemens saying, this is our migration into the future. So how are industry actors responding to digitalization? I guess my question would be, you work with business intelligence, data analytics teams across utilities, across RTOs, system planners, across the spectrum, right?
Right.
What's your advice for them? Because you're basically, we are experts on digitalization. You can trust that we have a compass approach to this and a methodology that really lends itself to the qualitative and quantitative elements of what you're doing. What's your advice to those business intelligence and data analytics offices as they prepare for this, which you've been preparing for years?
Well, I would say, number one, the fact that they're there is already, they're heeding the advice that there's got to be a change in approach.
That's a good point.
Second, the adoption of another way of thinking to not replace, but to augment our current way of thinking is the second. We're the change leaders in the organization that, again, aren't going to take the organization in a 180-degree different direction, but start to augment with these new way of thinking. The third, we need to be much more open to the next generation of thought and interaction to this. I mean, my kids are starting to get to the age where they are the next level of customer to the grid. But I look at what's going on. We spend a fair amount of time at the elementary, middle, and high school levels. They're starting to act differently. And in the panel we just were in, there was a debate over, will the grid continue, will it disappear? And one of the advocates was, the grid's going to disappear. And while I don't buy into that in its present state, if the consumers of the grid take a different approach to it, absolutely it's going to disappear. So that recognition by the industry and the adoption of that different way of thinking, that's going to be the biggest catalyst overall. Then that permutates our creation of solutions. It permutates a regulatory model to enable the business structure. It permutates the industry. And ultimately, whether you say the society is a recipient of the change or they're the driver of the change, that's ultimately what we're going to need to see.
That takes me to a few thoughts. I guess you're talking about your children, legacy, what's lasting, what needs to change. You have hundreds of thousands of connected and autonomous devices today. But I guess studies are saying up to 20 billion devices that'll be connected and systems that'll be connected in the future. Some of those devices don't even exist yet, right? How are we going to manage? How does Siemens help manage that interoperability between utility and non-utility assets?
And that's where I would agree. I think your point's spot on. If you look at just Siemens, my business within Siemens, 250,000 connected grid devices.
Just in Siemens?
Just in Siemens. 55 million connected meters. And these are just for Siemens customers. We're a big company, but we, as a percent of the globe, hold a small component. So those are there, but to your point, it is billions of connectivity that ultimately will be driven into the model. Look at the connectivity that YouTube's driving. 500 years of video consumption consumed in a single day. Wow. 300 billion emails. I'm going to get my numbers wrong, but just huge numbers of interconnectivity that have occurred kind of as just an evolutionary response to the market. Siemens is going to facilitate that along with the rest. And while I believe the core technologies are there, we're not looking for the next advancement in core processing or in memory. Those are all there for our taking. It's how do we go about facilitating the use of the investments that have already been made. And so to your point, to connect even millions of devices, forget the billions, to connect the millions of devices, there has to be an autonomous connection built into these devices. If you look at the time it would take to configure every device to talk to each other, it's not going to be a cost-benefit value.
Yeah.
But if you look at, I just bought a new TV at Christmas, convinced my wife she'd survive it. Bought a new TV, put it on the wall, connected it to the internet. Bought it for the size, the picture, and all the other things. And all of a sudden, my sons are showing YouTube on it. And I said, what did you do? It auto-connected. Wow. It just popped up on their mobile device. Their mobile device, when they're big YouTube guys, they hit the play and it said, do you want to play it on the new TV? Wow. Those are the times of autonomous interaction that we're going to see value creation from in the, if you will, the Internet of Things or the machine-to-machine model that's going to persist over the next 20 to 100 years.
So whether it's grid system operations or consumer-facing solutions, Siemens is really embedded in this migration in the future of a connected and digitalized experience.
Absolutely. We're the machine experts. We built the machines that have fostered the model. We're the power systems engineer experts that know how these things physically have to interact. What better place to lead the interconnectivity of that through digitalization than with, you know, the legacy of our company expertise and the new investment of our company direction.
So ECO is a great place to hear about solutions for the future. What can we expect from Siemens in the next year or so?
Next year, I think you're going to see, maybe we'll start from the high level of digitalization, that value of data to information in very discrete examples, whether it be demand response, discrete value props as opposed to the general, the concept. You'll start to see that over the next year. If you look at where our investment for the electric infrastructure is going to be manifested, it's around the distributed energy model. So managing the distributed energy, it's a great migration and arguably disruptor to the industry to see all the distributed energy at the consumer level, at the independent operator level start to be present in the system. But the interaction and interconnectivity of that to the grid is where the real value prop is. And that's, again, in keeping with our digitalization strategy, but also in the focus of what's the next level of, if you will, smart grid or digital grid. That's where you're going to see our focus going forward.
So what are you seeing in the marketplace right now today?
So if you look, the one thing I'm seeing universally in the market is a recognition of change and opportunity. And I think that the core utility industry has always been criticized for its unwillingness to change. And I think that's the biggest, you know, overall example. But if you go to some discrete examples, we're working with New Brunswick Power up in Canada, province up in the Fredericton northeast part of Canada, a smaller utility that is covering 500,000 customers, both city and suburban and rural. Okay. And you look at, we've worked with them for the last several years, and it started with where does the strategy of what they want to accomplish as a community and service provider to their customers match up with the capabilities of what Siemens can enable for them. And it has naturally expanded into the opportunity where we've now helped to facilitate their solution strategy aligned with their corporate and customer strategy into what are the technologies not only that we've developed, but that we are developing. So bringing their influence and requirements back into our product and solution strategies. So that's been one example. You know, on the larger side, California ISO, very proactive in how they move the markets forward from a stability, a reliability, and an efficiency level. And California ISO and Siemens have been partners in the systems, and we help provide them with their market solutions for integrated market management. And I would argue, you know, they're one of the more progressive in the country as they've moved from that core of ISO operations to how do we make the market efficient as well. Then you go to one of our more recent customers. We just announced a partnership with the Blue Lake Rancheria Reservation in Northern California, a 100-acre community, if you will, that is looking for energy opportunity and independence with their own microgrid model. So they're looking at it to combine everything from solar and storage with biomass and core generation to provide energy security to their community, at the same time taking roughly 150 tons of carbon emissions out of the system every year. Wow. And so those are just three examples of opportunities that Siemens working with leaders in this industry and for their community and their customers.
It's interesting to me to see the investment that Siemens is making in communities like New Brunswick, because it goes beyond the technology. It goes into people working with people and really expanding that base of who's involved in that conversation. Right. It's probably one of the most rewarding things that you can get at a utility is is a partner.
Yeah, and we have partners, New Brunswick just being one, but it's been a great example. The teams that work with and for and at New Brunswick, they've experienced a totally different model with us, and being part of that solution planning. You know, we've got great power system engineers, we have great software guys, we have great analytics people, and we bring that greatness to our customer. But the value we get from participating with our customer in that planning process, as New Brunswick evidenced, just takes us to a whole nother level of capability and results at the end of the day. We're ecstatic to do it, looking for more.